Hello and welcome to another session on the live stream of the Guest Education and Global Leadership Summit. It's amazing to see so many leaders watching from all over the world, and we'd like to thank you all for joining us. A few bits of information about the live session before we get underway. There's a chat panel located on the right-hand side of the GRIB platform. Please feel free to ask us any questions, and our lovely moderator will get back to you, and we'll do our very best to pass these along to the panelists. Please note that because they are moderated, there may be a slight delay in your question showing or an answer. We'll do our best to get through them, but if we don't worry, as they're all saved in the system, and we'll get back to you after the event. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our fantastic panel for this much anticipated discussion. A big thank you to our chair and moderator, Jonathan Hughes, Manager UAE and Middle East at High Performance Learning, Abiola Lamikanra, the chairperson of the Association of International School Educators of Nigeria, Mutheu Kasanga, the chairperson of the Kenya Private Schools Association, Richard Sidharta, the chairperson of the Association of National and Private Schools in Indonesia, and Tracy Moxley, Director of Education and Innovation at VIE Education in Switzerland. We have such an amazing and diverse panel, and I can't wait to hear the discussion. We hope that you enjoyed the session, and I'll now hand over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Danny. We have today, and welcome everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. We've got a complete worldwide session there. We've got a very distinguished panel with us today, and it's going to be fascinating to hear from a group of people who are experienced school leaders who have gone through this extraordinary year together of their experiences and what they've learned. And I think this is one of the great things which can come out of the COVID experience is the idea that we can learn from it and develop and grow. But I thought it would be very useful for all of us to put it in context if we could just, if I could ask all the members of the panel to briefly explain a little bit about their background, the schools they run, the organizations they run, and that they represent. So, Abby, could I ask you to start off?
Okay. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. I'm the chairperson of the Association of International School Educators of Nigeria, and we are made up of over 100 private schools, privately owned schools in Nigeria. And the one common factor that runs through us is the fact that we all take international examinations. And that has been what has been the binding force all along, even for the coming together of the schools. It was so that we could make sure that the international exams that are being offered through British Council at that point in time, we are now about 14, 15 years old, that we wanted to improve the quality of delivery of those examinations. And from that we now have various things: teacher training, head training, and also student activities, so that our own cohort of schools, all of our students come together to have intellectual activities, sports and cultural activities. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. That's useful. And in fact, because of that, it's going to be interesting to see how assessment and exams, we might touch on that pass on a bit later on as to where that is. Mutheu,
yes.
Could you let us know a bit about you and your school and your organization?
Yes, my name is Mutheu Kasanga from the Kenya Private Schools Association. I also do run a number of schools called the Kenya Schools, comprising of early years, primary and secondary schools. The Kenya Private Schools Association is the umbrella body for all private schools in Kenya that deal with the local curriculum, the Kenyan curriculum. We are at the moment actually in transition, moving away from a very exam and cramming focused curriculum to a competency-based curriculum, which is actually brought in some new elements during the pandemic, things we could never have anticipated, and made us really put on our thinking hats as we blundered through the pandemic. We have a third of the education in Kenya is privately provided, so a third of the total population of school-going children in Kenya attend a private school, so they tend they encompass the entire spectrum from really low cost to pretty much the high cost as well. We've got a very vibrant international schools system, but that's another association. And the KPSA, we have now, surprisingly, a growing number of low-cost international schools that are our members. There are around 40 schools right now that are coming in, and we are determined to make sure every school in the country belongs to an association. And the pandemic has sort of thrown it as a necessity for schools not to operate alone. The thinking that we had to put in place during the pandemic makes us all want to work together. So thank you very much for that.
That's another, every time somebody contributes, that's another aspect we could follow up on in terms of the role of associations, as well as a fascinating thing about curriculum and curriculum change at this particular moment. Slightly different area. Tracy, do you want to let us know about your schools and the background of where you fit in?
Absolutely. So we're the new kid on the block. We're opening new schools during COVID. It's become one of my fortes, apparently. So in the UAE, we opened one school there during COVID, and now we are opening again here in Switzerland. So I'm opening Montreux International School in August. We have an online academy that's launching basically in 2 weeks' time, and another school next year in Neuchâtel in Switzerland. So I am the Director of Education and Innovation, and all of the above, the recruitment of students, preparations within this scenario is where we are.
That's a new and different challenge.
Yes.
Yeah, fantastic.
Absolutely.
And Richard.
Absolutely.
Do tell us about where you are and what's happening.
Hey, John. Hi. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. I'm Richard. I'm from Jakarta, Indonesia. I am a founder of a school, Beacon Academy, that goes from K to 12. And we also have a range of preschools called Kiddie Planet in Jakarta. I am also the chairperson for the Association of National and Private Schools here in Indonesia. It's an association that's 21 years old, and it basically focuses on providing accessible and affordable professional development to Indonesian teachers here in Indonesia, because that's really important. A lot of Indonesian schools here, most of our members are schools that either follow the Cambridge or IB curriculum or similar, and a lot of the Indonesian teachers don't have access to quality professional development, and a lot of PD, or at least English-based PD, happens out of the country. So we have been trying to fill that gap by providing, a leadership conference, a teachers conference, an early childhood conference, and we've been running these for years. And of course, COVID's been that neutralizing factor that's brought everything together and online. So we just finished our teachers conference on Saturday, in fact, and we had almost 500 teachers come together on Saturday for our teachers conference, which was fantastic. So that's another thing about COVID, as one of our colleagues just said. It's in a funny way sort of brought everybody together. Indonesia is a very diverse country across 3 time zones, and we've got lots of islands, and it's so great to actually see events now being held where we've got people from all over the country across time zones actually attending these events, where initially there would be a lot of them would be Jakarta centric, being most of our members are from the capital city, and those guys would find it hard to attend. So
and they're getting really high quality CPD, which they wouldn't necessarily have had in the past. And it's fascinating how the bonuses arrive. Now, you, Richard, it's as though you've teed that question up for me, but in terms of developing teachers, what's been the impact of the pandemic, and what are the implications for recruiting and retaining high quality teachers? Would you like to start, Richard, on that one? What's been happening in Indonesia in terms of recruitment and retention?
Sure. Look, I'm probably the outlier here. A lot of you guys are from the Middle East and African area or zone. And I don't know what it's like over there, to be honest, but Indonesia is a challenge in and of itself due to the amount of work that's required to bring an expatriate teacher in. There are usually always issues even with linearity. So there are minimum requirements, including the number of years of experience that one must have had before they can actually come in and teach in Indonesia. To be fair, quote unquote, with the Indonesian teachers, basically. What kind of degrees must you have had? What kind of subjects must actually appear in the transcript before the Department of Manpower can actually approve your paperwork? So there's a lot of bureaucracy that goes in under normal circumstances in itself. So this year has been a challenge, because we've had teachers in our schools that have not been let in the country right from the top of this academic year. They've been teaching online. Schools have been luckily still online, so it's not created too much of an issue. But there's still no end in sight. We don't know whether they're still going to be here at the start of the new academic year, because there's no transparency about what it's looking like in terms of bringing teachers in. So the main focus, Jonathan, has been on whoever's in the country, focus on them, focus on local teachers that have been doing it for a while, and if you've got good quality teachers in your school, do anything that you can to keep them, because it's a costly affair to replace them.
And I think that would be echoed elsewhere. I don't know, Mutheu, what's been happening in Kenya in that particular area?
For us in the private sector, it's actually been quite a surprisingly difficult time during the pandemic. And I saw this happen the world over. We had to let go of very many teachers because of the iniquity of online teaching, where not many schools could mount online teaching, and therefore they had to release their teachers to just go home and stay without pay. So that was one of the big challenges we had. Then when we are fully reopened now for face-to-face learning across the entire education spectrum, when we reopened, as I said, we are going through a curriculum change. We are having problems attracting people to train for teachers, and we are projecting a massive teacher shortage across the sector, both public and private. And I don't think anyone else in the world is going through that. So, and the main driver for that is the fact that now to join teacher training, they have put in higher requirements for qualifying to join the teacher training colleges. But that said, then now we have to retain the teachers that we have. And that's where our thinking hats have been put on. As the Kenya Private Schools Association, we have embarked on a program of upskilling and reskilling teachers, especially on digital technologies, to ensure that the teachers that we have currently, we are able to retain them. We have also, embarked on school leaders and principals training, because if we better train the head teachers, we'll be able to then make sure the workforce, the teachers, are more likely to stay. So we seem to be in a unique space, and I've talked to a few other Eastern African and Southern private school spaces, and we are already beginning to see an influx of teachers from Zimbabwe into the country, which is very strange. We've been net exporters of teachers since 1963 for the first time. We're going to be importing teachers to teach the local curriculum, which is very
a fascinating move there.
Yes.
Abby, what have you found in Nigeria? What's been happening over there? Sorry, Abby, you're on mute. It's all right. It's traditional.
Okay, I know one of those things that happens these days. In Nigeria, and in particular the ASEN, which is the association that I'm part of, before the pandemic, because you see, the pandemic has thrown up inequalities and the inadequacies that were there before the pandemic. Okay, so whatever was working well before the pandemic, one built on it, and if it wasn't working well before the pandemic, it's now totally exposed. And so in our association, we had been, our focus had been on teacher training, okay, teacher CPD, a lot of CPD, and as I said, student activities. And so what then happened during the pandemic was, first and foremost, we reassured one another that we shouldn't panic, nobody should panic. Nobody should lay off staff, because the truth is that school owners were quite worried that they might have to keep on staff whom they could not afford to pay, because parents understandably did not want to pay, saying that online school, they didn't quite understand it, and hey, the children are not in school, so why do we need to pay so much money? Because the schools in the association are quite pricey. But we were able to allay everybody's fears, and so throughout from about April until the end of the last school year, we were running various workshops for our teachers, on digital skills and just upscaling everyone, bringing everybody up to speed, as it were. And so, as much as we wouldn't have, and again, Nigeria is, we have a lot of people, we have a lot of professionals. So we will be able to retain staff. It's now dependent upon each school and whatever it is that you have to offer. Again, that's the private sector. For the national schools, for the public schools, as we call them, the picture was different from one state to another, because we have 36 states in Nigeria, and each of these states have different.
Right.
Yes, they have different rules and regulations for their schools, and so that again flavors all that is going on. But the most important thing is that most schools in Nigeria are now back, face to face.
Back face to face. Yeah. Yeah.
In some areas where the pandemic is still a little bit dicey, then they are having blended learning and things of that sort.
Right.
But,
right. And Tracy, you've got the unique experience of starting schools and recruiting teachers. Hopefully, that must be even more a fascinating insight on that one. Tell us.
Yeah. So we've really focused on in-country staff, to be fair. I think the problems of travel at the moment in the current pandemic have meant that recruitment is far easier with our in-country teachers because of lack of knowledge in terms of those travel restrictions and the fact that they've changed so many times, particularly in Europe. So we've been very lucky. We've got some teachers who have been available, and in my experience previously, there was a much more of a holding position within the pandemic. Teachers really wanted to stay where they were because of a lack of knowledge and what would happen in the future. So opening schools, I have to say, we've been very lucky, and we've been able to attract new teachers to our 2 new schools that are opening.
Gosh, that's fascinating that you've been able to do that. What's again I find really interesting is the commonality between all the schools. You've all talked about CPD. You've all talked about the need to retain teachers as much as possible, and that actually the importance of CPD for retaining teachers, and yet there's obviously been different challenges. And Mutheu, it's certainly very worrying that there's going to be that shortage, considerable shortage. There are not enough teachers in the world anyway. If they're not coming back into teaching, that's more of a challenge. So moving on, what are the lessons that the leaders, because I think all of us, all schools at one stage had to shut down. What are the lessons that as school leaders that you learned from the rapid adaptation of online learning? What went well? What will be retained when normality, and some of you are back to more normal? It sounds as though Abby's got some blended learning face-to-face. Mutheu has got face-to-face. Richard, well, they're all on holiday at the moment. And Tracy is obviously a blended online. Who'd like to start talking about those ones? What did you learn about online learning?
I can start. Okay.
Don't be shy.
Online learning works. It works, and we saw the kids who had got access to online learning. When we reopened, we did a countrywide assessment just to benchmark the learning losses. We saw, yes, countrywide, the whole country, so all 13 million kids. And we saw the kids who had online learning had significant advantages over the ones who had no access whatsoever to anything. But then that brought in the digital divide that Abiola was talking about. And it is stark in Kenya. It is stark. It's like we're in a different continent. The schools that went online compared to the schools that had no learning. So for us, that gap is going to be something to think about deeply as we go ahead and worry and figure out how to fund EdTech in education. There is no doubt that it helps and it works. How to fund it to balance the equity issues is our big discussion. And I believe in Africa, that is the current discussion. So for us, it was an imperative. We had to go back to face-to-face learning because the gap was so massive.
And getting bigger.
Exactly. So our societal problems were the gaps between the rich and the poor. They were just laid bare by the pandemic. Yeah.
Abby, would you agree with that?
Totally. Like I said, we have 36 states in Nigeria. So I'll also now talk about the public schools. Those are the schools that are owned by the government. For some states, they were able to, there was a shaky start, okay, when schools had to close down because there was nothing in place, which is why I said what you were doing well before the pandemic showed up, and what you weren't doing well before the pandemic also showed up. So there was a shaky start, but some states managed to get their feet, and they actually brought in all kinds of innovation, from radio to TV to WhatsApp classes. You know, they did all of those sorts of things. But again, the divide will always come up, the haves and the have-nots, okay? For the ASEAN schools, remember that we had Ebola a few years ago.
Yes.
The Ebola crisis had shut down schools in Nigeria some time ago. And so, for instance, in the school that I run, City of Knowledge Academy in Ijebu-Ode, that's outside of Lagos, we had already started, working with online platforms.
Right.
You know, and so when the pandemic started, there was a basis for us to build on. There was a foundation to build on, and in any case, we had continued to interface and to experiment with different platforms and so on. So by the time the pandemic came up, we were then able to make up our minds which platform it was that we wanted to stay with. You know.
Yeah.
And
now I'm just interested there as to whether Richard, because of course Indonesia was affected by the SARS of, I can't remember how many years ago. Obviously the Ebola crisis was more recent, but Richard, had there been previous knowledge about how to do online learning? No.
Yeah, no, SARS not so much with us. I resonate with whatever Abby and Mutheu was sharing. Indonesia is pretty similar in context. We're the fourth largest country in the world, and when you know our colleagues are speaking about digital divide, it's paramount here too. Those have been addressed and they're fairly similar. The one thing that I felt that even for students or families that have access to technology, and most of the schools within our association do, because they satisfy an international education.
Yes. Yeah.
So generally they're of a certain standard of schooling, if you like, and then middle income families basically are the ones that are going to these kind of schools. But irrespective of the kind of school, the preschools have really taken a very big hit here. It will be interesting. I know, Mutheu, you spoke about 13 million children surveyed. I don't have access to that kind of information as far as Indonesia is concerned, but I know for a fact that the amount of parents that have dropped out of preschool and just sort of concerned about the loss of development there, to the point that in year one next year, we are actually placing preschool teachers, to try and bridge that gap, because usually year one teachers are expecting children to come into year one with certain levels of development, whether emotionally, socially, academically. And if they've been teaching year one for years, for example, they may not be sensitive to, what's actually supposed to happen when they're 4 years old, and they've actually lost now 18 months by the time we get to face-to-face learning, if they open for preschools in July. And news is that they will not open for preschools or year ones in July. It'll still be a little longer for us. So there's a lot of challenges here. Digital divide, resonate completely, agree everything with whatever was shared before. Pretty similar.
Yeah, and Tracy, obviously with those new schools, you've had to rely on online learning straight away.
Absolutely.
What have the schools learned, and from that?
Yeah, I mean, from a very positive perspective, we've seen that huge paradigm shift change with all stakeholders because of the pandemic. And I don't think we were ready, but I think teachers and leaders did just a phenomenal job in making that shift. We know that there are challenges, and there are challenges with regard to students' ability to learn in those new models, in teachers' capability. So CPD, our colleagues have talked about, and the need to have that digital learning for staff. And those champions in school that have always used blended learning and digital tools to support their colleagues as well. I just think we've seen some stunning collaboration between colleagues supporting one another. I think we know that we have now to support our parents much more, and to support our colleagues much more with regard to well-being. You know, teachers work so hard in putting together those models where, you know, they were building online resources, they were teaching online, they were having one-to-ones with students, and trying to do everything and be all things to all men at one point. Certainly in the Middle East, we were running live face-to-face classes with half the students, and also teaching online to the other half of the students, and also preparing resources. So my hat literally goes off to all of the teachers during the pandemic, because they've just done amazingly.
It's the pace at which it happened, you know, suddenly to move online for a lot of the Middle East and Europe in particular, with 2 weeks notice or less than 2 weeks notice, you know, you're going to all be shut down. So it's extraordinary how the staff has adapted. As you say, I think it is the youngest years who have suffered most, because there is so much of their developmental aspects which we are concerned about. Now, Mutheu and Abby and Richard, to a degree, how's been the re-entry of pupils back into school? I can imagine, Mutheu, your kids are delighted in being back into school in that particular way. How did you prepare? How they're reacting? What's been happening in that particular way?
For us in Kenya, sorry, go ahead, Abiola.
Well, the children have just taken to, you know, children are so flexible, and they can easily adapt. And so as much, I would also say this, that our children didn't particularly like the online classes. They got used to them. They did what they needed to do, but they really prefer to be with their friends, okay, and you know, and see one another. So the students the school I run is a full boarding school, for instance. So all the children, all the children have been back in school, and all that we did was that we've created our own bubble, as it were. You know, there were no visiting days, midterm. You know, nobody went home. So it's been a safe environment, and so life has actually it's just gone back to normal. But what has now happened is that we are then taking advantage of the gains that we made during the pandemic. Because, for instance, a teacher is feeling poorly and is at home. The teacher can now deliver their lessons from home. You know, because it's now a normal thing to happen. So I think, again, I congratulate teachers all over the world, educators all over the world. We've all done a fantastic job, you know, getting schools running again and doing what is necessary. But I quite agree as well that the young ones, they are the ones who have lacked a lot, because they can't do things with their hands, you know, just like they used to do when they're in the classroom. So
yeah, exactly. And there, I'm fascinated that Kenya has done this survey to look at that learning loss, which we'll touch on a bit later. But how have your students reacted, and what was it easier to get them back into school than you thought?
At the beginning of the pandemic, and I know this is a worldwide sort of now a joke and things, that parents really were excited to have the kids home. By the time we reopened, parents wanted their kids back in school very, very fast. And everybody was sort of tired of trying to manage working at home with managing the learning. But that said, looking back, we have completely have been unable during the pandemic to cater for any children with special needs. And that sticks out as an area that, as we plan and figure out what our disaster management policy as a country is for education, we need to figure out what we can do, because this pandemic is the first major big thing to ever happen in Kenya. We've never had such disruption. So for us, this is the first time we are thinking about a strategy. And as a private sector, we've already engaged and are talking with Microsoft to help us come together with a strategy to make sure that other disruptions that come and the ongoing COVID, because for us, our government says we won't be vaccinated, all of us as a country, until 2025, they say. So for us, it's quite big. So education during emergencies for us is a big discussion at the moment as a private sector. And we noticed that because of the learning gaps and the pandemic and, managing all these issues, the reopening was actually quite cumbersome. Very cumbersome. We had to reopen in phases, and then we had to check the learning losses. Then we had a second spike, and we had to grit our teeth and open in spite of it. And in the end, we've learned one thing, because we couldn't social distance in our schools. And I believe this is an Africa-wide discussion. Other than international schools, the local curriculum schools, both private and public, we simply did not have the infrastructure to social distance. Yes. So we opened without social distance. We had compulsory masking and hand washing. And with our teenagers, I don't know if Jakarta, you got into this problem, but we saw our young teenagers in secondary schools quickly figuring out how to separate sanitizer using salt to take it on as alcohol. So we had drunk students for about 2 weeks before we realized what was going on. And we had to remove the use of hand sanitizer from schools, especially the boarding secondary schools. So, you can imagine the disaster that was waiting. And we saw this across both public and private schools. So, very interesting. So, we just use hand washing, soap and water, countrywide, and compulsory masking. And
they would just say, we're using our initiative, miss. We're using our initiative, miss. We're fascinated by science.
Absolutely.
Tracy, what have you found in terms of that?
Well, our students start in August in the new schools, so they're not there yet.
But the online academy you're running.
So we've actually got more students on our online academy than we have in face-to-face school right now. So, so for us, we believe that the online and blended models are here to stay, and we will perfect those so that students from anywhere in the world can actually start school, no matter who, no matter where, no matter what, and get a quality education online with mentors. And we're trying to perfect that model so that we can ensure that we're not jumping and we're not sure about what to do when we move into fully online or blended education. So it's been great for us. The V Academy is going strong, so we're happy about that.
Which, yeah, and it was designed to be online, as it were, at that particular stage. I think the blended learning part is going to be, I know from talking to colleagues and in fact my daughter, she finds the blended learning the hardest, where you have face-to-face and online in the same room, and it's jolly difficult to do it effectively.
Yeah.
Richard, in Indonesia and Jakarta, how long were you out, and how long, you've touched already on that, and I think fascinating idea that to use early years teachers in year one is certainly there, and we'll touch on that. But can you reflect back on what was happening and what challenges you found?
Yeah, look, we're still online. We closed about, I think, a year ago, I think around the mid of March, it was 15th to the 18th of March, closures started happening. And a lot of schools within our association that, follow international curricula closed in absence of government direction. Simply because we just knew morally and ethically, we can't operate at this moment in time. And we just kept hanging on and waiting for directive, and it just never came. So it's been a year now. If anything, learning from what Mutheu was sharing earlier about, how cumbersome it was to get kids back. And also from our neighboring countries like Malaysia, the amount of times that they've actually come back on campus and then off again. I for once am not complaining of the lack of leadership, if I can say, in terms of the the education sector, and probably the lack of initiative is better. We've just been following, and the ball's been thrown in everyone's court. We were basically told in January that it's your prerogative as a school whether you choose to open or not. I mean, imagine the accountability, the issues there. I mean, how is it our prerogative? The minister, your local province is supposed to take some kind of accountability to be able to open. But no, there was a directive. Schools decide. Survey your parents. You decide whether you can open or not. We're like, no way. No one's going to do that. And this is exactly where we are. So the only thing we know, John, is that they've asked for all schools, teachers, staff to be vaccinated between April to June. And the only reason why we think that that's happening is because I don't think they can imagine a third academic year impacted. And what I mean by a third is the first one had the last 3 months gone. The second one had the whole year gone. And now, can you imagine if we don't start in July?
It's going to be, and the impact and that change for children only children once. It's that difficulty. They're never going to be 8, 9, 10 again. You only do it once. And
my own son, in this unique situation, John, my own son graduated from preschool, virtually, and now he's come into year one, and he basically didn't see the end of preschool, and he's not been in year one.
Yeah. So it's a fascinating part in that particular aspect. Moving on, but I'm conscious of two things. One is time runs away, and secondly, very quickly, Abiola, what platform did you use for the online lesson in Nigeria? That was a question asked.
Yes.
You might want to put it in the chat box, but
okay, I will. I will.
There's another whole session we could have about what we found worked well and what didn't. But we need to do that after legal advice, probably. And therefore, we won't touch on that one as to where it was. I'm fascinated, though, Tracy, by just finishing off on this reintegrating back into schools and moving from what you said. The social and emotional development of children is a key part to that. That's really important to do. How can we develop that when they're all online? You were talking about mentoring.
Yeah. So from my perspective, one of I think the big positives is a real focus on emotional and social development of students and their well-being. It's always been important, but it's kind of always been over here because we focused on academics. So from my perspective, having that as central has been really important. I'll talk a little bit about the Middle East, where I came from, and the kinds of activities we were doing there. So we actually started having whole school approaches to well-being, and that was things like 5-minute check-ins. So when a teacher starts the class or ends the class, there's a 5-minute check-in with all the students, see how they are, to see how they're doing, and also to kind of get an idea about if there's any students that we need to go back and speak to and just say, hey, how are you doing? We also reviewed the curriculum and the timetable. So one of the things you can do with online learning is look at how you're teaching, and you're not going to teach a timetable that starts at 7:30 and ends at 2:30. with having breaks in there where you can support the school community, support the students, have one-to-ones. We had an observer in those one-to-ones, so we would have somebody who would be there for safeguarding reasons. I think vulnerable children have been supported phenomenally well, and their parents. So one of the examples I can give is that we decided that on a Thursday, that would be our community support day. That would be where teachers would get a bit of a break from teaching, but also would make those telephone calls to parents, have virtual conferences and support the students as well. And so we designed some resources that would help parents teach their children and make it fun and exciting, and try to sort of veer away from that heavy academic content. So I think from that perspective, it's allowed us to be much more creative about how we teach and support the students and continue that well-being. You know, happy, engaging teachers have to be twice as much online in order to keep that class going and make sure they ask every child a question. And I think we've seen some fantastic strategies for student engagement with our teachers. And so I think there's been a lot of positives as well as some of the more challenging elements of the pandemic.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And it is how we've adapted the curriculum. We can't just lift the timetable and put it down and teach online, either because of Mutheu was saying, there is no online, half the population haven't got it, and therefore you can't do that effectively. But it's interesting how one adapts in that particular way. I think I would just like to develop that a bit further and look at how assessment is done.
With great difficulty, Jonathan.
Oh, I'm so disappointed. I thought we've got, 4 very bright, intelligent, good-looking people here, and we could crack it.
Yeah, we can crack it. We can.
But it is that huge difficulty with others, whether it's Mutheu introducing a new curriculum where you've got to assess how that new curriculum is being developed, or whether it's Abby with international qualifications being sat, and the same for Richard and Tracy. How are we going to do that and maintain the morale of our senior pupils in particular who are worried about their next educational steps? Any thoughts on that? And by the way, if we come up with the right idea, we'll share the profits between us. Sorry. Abby.
Well, I'm just going to say that at this point in time, the whole world is in a learning process. Okay. The truth is it's just a trial and error kind of thing that is going on, because for us in for schools that offer IGCSEs, for instance, it was traumatic last year. It was traumatic because at that point everything was turned upside down. The children were not going to take exams, and they were not going to work on their predicted grades, and they were going to do this and they were going to do that. And so I know that in the UK there was an uproar, but also in the international community as well. There were children that were missing grades, and what do you do about it? Now, when the last set of IGCSEs that took place in Nigeria in October, unfortunately, there was a protest. There was a national protest at that point in time, and so some exams could not be taken. So again, you have children missing some grades, and but what has now happened is that they are now offering to the children the chance to take the exam yet again. So that's why we look at these young ones, that they're so resilient and strong because they've been through so much, and the senior ones, they're looking at university just a few months away, and then you seem to be taking the chance away from them. What is going to happen? But like I keep on trying to encourage each one of us, is that we are going through a black swan event. It's never happened before. Hopefully it's never going to happen again. And so whatever it is that we do within this period, we shouldn't be too hard on one another. Okay. We should moderate it. And I'm sure the universities too everything is up in the air. That's just the honest truth about it.
Yeah.
Everything is up in the air, but every sector, each sector of the educational hierarchy, they are doing the very best that they can do within all of this confusion that is going on. And at the end of the day, like I said, educators are flexible, educators are resilient, you know, which is why I'm sure that we will all get one way or the other. There's no prescription that we are going to be able to follow.
Thanks, Abby. And Richard, any reflections of what's happening in Indonesia in that particular area?
Yeah, pretty similar. I mean, same trajectory here. You've got all of these exams, that basically had to be cancelled, and we had to persevere, and we had to tap into the resilience of the teachers and the students. And if anything, some of the more proactive schools, I know what we did was we already predicted that this was going to happen this year after what happened last year. And in fact, last year, the students lost the last 3 months, which means that they had done everything up to the point of the final examinations. So this year, we started off the year under the assumption that the exams would not take place. So we really, really focused on internal assessments. We didn't want to stress the kids out at the end. We really focused on what would happen if there were no exams and prepared the kids for it so that there just wouldn't be any stresses at the end. And that's exactly how it transpired, and our kids are feeling much better now. But we always are speaking about, these endpoint examinations, your year 12s or your GCSEs. And somehow to think that these curriculum bodies are suddenly so rattled when a pandemic comes in, it just sort of makes you think at the end of the day, the so-called be-all and end-all of a student's education. And have they got it all figured out or not?
Which is fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And it does, does the emperor have any clothes? Mutheu, I'm going to come back to you because you looks as though you're developing a new curriculum, which I'd love to hear more about, and how you're going to do assessment in that. Tracy, have you got any views about, I don't know whether any with the new schools coming through, obviously they might not be at an assessment stage.
We are actually looking at online assessments. I think we're going to see quite a few of those coming online. At my last company, we were trialling with grade 12 some of these online proctors and online software that does testing, so students can test at distance. So I think we'll see a lot more of these new software coming in so that students can sit a final exam. I'm just delighted that ultimately the professionalism of teachers in their judgments of their own students was how many of the exam boards went, with some pressure, I know, but certainly that is what we need to do. Those teachers know their students best. They've predicted grades for those students, and I think leaving it to the experts of those students was the best thing that many of the examination boards could do at that point.
I think the problem is that the examination boards don't like that because effectively it's doing away with the examination boards. And not that I'm not saying any more than that. However, Mutheu, before I get into deep trouble, obviously the whole curriculum has moved away in Kenya from what you were saying, from a more academic assessment to a much more skills-based and a different, a more appropriate curriculum. Can you talk about that and the challenges that there have been in how you assess how progress is being made in your new curriculum? I think I've lost you.
Yes. For us in Kenya, the competency-based curriculum is now at year 4. So, and we are progressively moving up as we phase out. Yes, so as we phase out the other one. And during the pandemic, of course, everything just halted. Just one day, March 15th, the next day, there was no school countrywide. And as we have reopened, therefore, we've prioritized that first year and they were in the first group that came back to school. And the whole idea was just to brush up on the skills, the things for us who went online. It was just to brush up on the few things we couldn't do, a lot of the practical work that we couldn't really do online. A lot of us who went online just went immediately for the readily available free software, so Google Classroom, Microsoft Teams. Those two were the two outstanding, and then later on Zoom. So really we were lecturing students in front of computers. So, you know, like there were the methodology of going online was truly just an emergency intervention. So when we came back to school, the first thing has been just to catch up on all the skills that the kids would have been acquiring the whole of 2020, and they didn't acquire that. And it's been condensed. We've picked up from lessons from West Africa and Ebola, how they compressed the curriculum to make up for lost time. But Kenyans, we love our exams. We really do love exams. And that's why the British curriculum is so huge in Kenya. So we had exams when we opened just to check the learning losses. Then now we have, you know, our progression exams that factor in the practical work, as well as a small amount of whatever. Then we have our national exams for transitions for the old curriculum students. And the whole country is in the mood. The newspaper articles are all about kids, day 2 of exams, you know. We're really very engrossed about our exams, and we deeply love our exams. So I'm also very following up on the pros and cons. We're still debating whether this is the best way, as people begin to understand what a competency-based curriculum is, and how kids exit into tertiary and higher education. So we're still very much, you know, understanding as a country, despite the fact that we've been at it for 4 years or so. And there's a lot of, you know, arguments pro and cons, because Kenyans just believe in their exams, and they know just about exams are the main way for transitioning.
Yes.
So we are hoping we can retain more students in education. We've already seen a significant drop in the number of students who drop out of school at early years, like Richard said. That's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. And we've got compulsory education going on. So already the numbers have been improved by that. And then the gender balance as well. Absolutely. The gender balance is now at parity in primary schools for the first time ever.
Great. I mean, that's exciting steps, and actually nothing to do with the pandemic or anything like that, but really exciting steps going on. We've got a bit of extra time, and we can use our extra time sensibly, because although as a man who used to get extra time for his reading, I know that you always make the maximum use of it. We've got some questions which I think we ought to, before Rushda and others have to move on. We were asked, would we be able to bridge the gaps as educators among students any way possible? In other words, this was when we were talking about learning gaps and the difficulties that students might have. Richard touched on it. I thought fascinating idea of using early years teachers in year 1, etc. Are there any other ways in which schools are using or contemplating changing the learning gaps and tackling the learning gaps? I'd heard of using mentors, senior pupils to mentor junior pupils is one. I don't know whether anybody else has heard of others, but otherwise it's the redeployment of that. And then can you tell us what practices work best for the children? Daisy Paul wrote that one in, which that might be more complex, because I can't remember what we were was that about online learning? That could have been during online learning. Would anybody like to pick that one up? And if not, what about the authentic and performance-based assessments? Do you think authentic and performance-based assessments can help us phase out traditional exams, or do we need to wait for universities to do we need to wait on universities to be ready first? Any thoughts on any of those ones?
Yeah, on that last question, Jonathan, I think we'll see change in how we assess students, and I think we are moving much more towards that continuous assessment, that competency and skills-based assessment. I know a lot of schools around the world are looking at the curriculum and looking at the assessments, and after all of the changes and the shifts that we've seen in education, I think we'll definitely see those elements changing as well. And I think we're starting to go down that road now. We know education is slow to move into these new areas, but I think we've seen our abilities now to move quickly when we need to. And I think universities will need to open themselves up more to some of these new qualifications, these new assessments, and I think we can work with them in order to do that. So I think we will see significant changes at the higher education end.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the significant change, because suddenly, much as education in schools has been transformed by online learning, suddenly people are questioning, why am I going to university? Why is that going to cost me so much money to go to university? What am I learning? And it is a bit of an existential threat, as it were.
I think it is adapt or die. I think we've got to that point now where even universities are offering online courses and offerings to engage students.
Yeah.
So I think we'll see the change there quite quickly.
Yes. And the MOOCs which are available anyway, and lockdown meant that there were actually the number of people who took up subjects they were, just because it was fun to learn, which is a revolutionary thing.
And
we don't want to be fun to learn.
A lot of sorry.
As I say, we've got a bit of time. Abby, for those of you who can't see it, sadly is in the middle of a storm. And therefore might not have great links with us at the moment. But it's really a case of beginning to wash up. What are the lessons that we've learned from this pandemic? It's been a major shift. What are we going to be able to do better than we've been doing before? Because positivity is what teachers do. It's why we're teachers. We always believe it's going to get better. What will we take away from this positively? Who'd like to start on that one?
I could go, John. I think.
Thank you, Richard.
Oh, okay, Richard.
Sorry.
Yeah. You carry on.
Yeah. Look, as someone that's actually founded a school. When you've actually, got a baby of your own, you feel like as if you had your hand, on every single thing, every single problem. You want to be able to preempt everything before they actually happen, but you don't want to lose sleep over something that will blow up next week if you can sort of handle it now. There are all of these things that usually happen. But I think one has really realized during this pandemic that you really can't control everything. So much has, right? I mean, in the bigger picture, you can't control everything because, look at what's happened, right? But even within our own school settings, everything's become so decentralized that there's so much trust, faith, if you can sort of believe in that. That's come in, and how teachers have basically pulled much more than their weight. Their sense of responsibility, their sense of belonging, their commitment, their accountability. And somehow as a school leader, you sit back and think, well, hang on, the only thing that you could really be in control of, and of course, all of this had to happen pre-COVID, the recipe is really how we actually were with each other, the culture of the school, the environment of the school, the relationships that we had pre-COVID that actually created the recipe for what would happen in times of adversity. So my main takeaway from this is trust, focusing on relationships between teachers and students and parents. And that's how the whole community's actually rallied together. And if that wasn't the case pre-COVID, I don't think it would have been very easy. During COVID.
And that's the leadership of you as a school leader, play a key role, and setting that culture is so important within it. Mutheu, any thoughts from you?
Yes. For us, allow me to, I agree with Richard completely. I also own a school, so I 100% agree with him. But for us in the private sector, because we're so huge, we happen as the Private Schools Association to sit on all the policy making panels with government. And looking back and looking forward, we have about 6 things that we have identified that we must put in place, not only to manage another pandemic or the continuation of this pandemic, but any other disruptions that we have in our country. Learners with special needs stand out, and we have to figure out how to make it work for every child. For us, our policy, we just didn't have a strategy for managing education during emergencies. We've never had such major disruption. We do have smaller localized disruptions like flooding, droughts, and things like that. But we realized we just send kids home for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, however long it takes to recover from that, and then they come back, and then we just don't have a strategy to make sure that they work, and this cuts across both public and private. We have realized the importance of school leaders and principals, and how we have to put in a lot of work to keep empowering them to be better leaders. We saw the schools in the private sector that had outward-looking leaders adapt faster to online learning and technologies than the schools that just sat back and waited for a government directive. Again, for us, professional development stands out as something that we must really double down on. And finally, education technology.
Rich is here. Tracy, I don't know. Suddenly, might be my end.
Everybody just went off suddenly.
Hello, Danny. We all disappeared.
Yes, not sure exactly what happened.
I tell you what, we overran our time even more than we should have overrun our time. However,
but I mean, it's such a fascinating discussion, and I'm sure our audience really enjoyed it. So thank you so much.
Can I just thank everybody?
Again?
Yeah, and thank you, everyone. I'm only sorry this is a virtual meeting, not a real meeting, because this could be a conversation which we'd all enjoy sitting over a meal. And thank you, Abby. Thank you for that. And if there are any more questions, I know that do send them in, and Danny will make sure.
Yes. So thank you so much, Jonathan, Abiola, Mutheu, Tracy, and Richard, for providing us with such valuable insights and really amazing global perspectives. It was really fascinating to hear from you, and we had some great comments from the audience to really attest to that. I know we've got a few more questions, as you said, Jonathan, that we couldn't get to, but we'll make sure we pass them on to you. And once we end the session, you'll be redirected to a short survey, or the audience will be redirected to a short survey. So please pass the thoughts. If there are any topics
is alive and well
of speakers you'd like to hear from, we'd love to hear from you, and we'll be on social media as well during the event. So if you want to connect with us there, follow us on Twitter @GuestEducation and use the hashtag #GuestGlobal. A massive thank you once again to our panel and also you, our audience. We're going to have a short break in today's live session stream, but don't miss out on the next live session that'll come up at 4:30 Gulf Standard Time, or UAE time. So in around an hour. In the meantime, we do have plenty of really inspiring on-demand content that are continuously running on the pre-record stream. So, make sure you don't miss out on those. We hope that everyone enjoys the rest of the event. Take care and see you in the next session. Thank you all so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.